Hello everyone. A common question we get is, if I'm scheduling time to do daily review, how can I be efficient during that review? I don't want to just reread my notes, and I don't want to just rewrite my notes. So again, based on our principles of learning, we're going to go through a couple of things that can make you really productive with just a set of lecture notes. If you've got a couple of pages of lecture notes, or you've got 30-40 slides that you're trying to learn, and you've taken notes on, what can we do? This can also be applied to textbook. I'm just going to be speaking from a lecture note point of view. We use the COST method. This method is C for complete, O for organize, S for summarize, and then finally T for test yourself. We split these up into two sections. Here we want to prepare the material, get it stored in our memory, and then we also want to practice retrieving it. So this is storing, again, practicing retrieving, because this is what we're going to be doing on our exams. We have to be able to store it, but we also have to be able to pull it out. So let's practice testing. And if we just spend 10 minutes of our time just trying to actively recall, it's going to do wonders for our learning. Let's dive right in. Step number one, complete your notes. Asking a friend, ask the prof after class, check the textbook. Again, these can be all done after class, all of these can be done immediately after class. Depending on how well you took notes during class, you might not have to do any of these. This step one is just a very basic step. It could take 5 minutes, it could take 20 minutes. You may have to put it off until you can actually do some of these. So again, it's a little bit, can be straightforward, or you might just have to wait a little bit of time. Again, it will depend, but you can adapt. Doesn't mean you can't do the next steps either if these aren't available to you completely. The next steps might even help you to ask questions about what you need to complete. So we'll jump into step number 2, organizing. Now, when we say organize, we want to generate diagrams or representations. Representation here, these are visual aids for learning. Now, our textbooks are filled with these. We probably did these all throughout high school. You've probably done these all before. Now we want to start doing them on our own. So when we read a paragraph of text and we compare a paragraph of text and this visual representation of that paragraph of text, which one's easier to review? That's what we want to do. And by making these, we're actively thinking about the connections. We want to build connections, internal and external. This is going to help us to build those internal connections and maybe even highlight some external connections as we go through making these. Number one is a hierarchy. Hierarchy shows levels of importance, and it breaks down ideas into related groups. It'll help us to create almost that example of the memory chunk we looked at before. The next one is a table. Now this table is actually, we're going to call it a matrix because it has rows and it has columns. The title, very clear. We'll have a title for the lecture, or we'll have a title for our concept, and then we'll have the 3 topics. Then what we want to have is we want to have these row headings. Now this is comparing and contrasting 3 different topics. And how are they comparing and contrasting? They're looking at architecture, they're looking at writing, they're looking at the leaders, and then they're looking at irrigation. How did these civilizations do all 4 of these things? So then again, these are all repeated across. Now this here could be 1 paragraph on each one in a textbook, or maybe the professor did each one of these as a slide. So slide number 1 is all of this information here. Slide number 2 is now let's look at Egypt and all of this information. And then the last slide. When we're in a lecture, we just see slide by slide by slide, but here we actually get to compare and contrast side by side when we actually actively join all this information together. So again, a very powerful way of showing a lot of information. The key to it though is these headings here. We want to be able to find these, and these here will be pretty common. They might stand out. Not often will they stand out during the lecture, but now that we know to look for them, how are we comparing and contrasting this information? We'll be able to start seeing these repeatable categories. Again, typically when we compare and contrast, we have to have 2 things, 2 or more. And I said the main key are these headings for the rows. Finding the topics for the columns is going to be very easy. We get told those pretty straightforward. But we just want to find out how we're comparing and contrasting. What can I put down here? Very common ones to put down, as you'll see shortly, definition and example, just even if you have 2 things. We've got 3 theories. Okay, well, how do I define each theory? What are the components of each theory? And what's an example of each theory in action or an application of it? Those are 3 things that could be quickly sketched out and answered and filled in, and help us to organize that information very quickly. Flowchart, again, very straightforward. cause and effect, relationships of a cyclical or sequential nature. Again, very common, very useful for mathematics as well, or any science experiment. But again, history will do this. Any chronology, this would also, even some of the fun ones to do, not only history, but an English novel. An English novel will be sorted. Maybe an English novel would look like a sequence and a hierarchy, all joined together. Again, a diagram, very powerful, a lot of information on here, very memorable, and very common. Again, I can't stress it enough. We don't have to do this for every single piece of information. If something is straightforward and you comprehend it straight away, we want to use this when we're getting confused and things are a little bit more difficult. It's just an active way to review our information and to make sense of things. That's what organizing is going to do. It's going to help us to really sort through what is confusing about this and how are things connected. Once we start drawing this out and sketching this out, it's going to start getting us through that confusion, and learning will start to take place. An example of looking at the big picture and organizing a whole lecture. Here, this is lecture 6 from linguistics class, I believe, and looking at all of this we just go in and see slide by slide by slide. Again, if we can take a big picture view, we can see pretty quickly, just by reading only the headings and subheadings without going into too much detail of the actual slides themselves. By only reading the headings and the subheadings, we can see that this is really structured. So again, this can really save us a bunch of time, and then we can attack these section by section by section and really go into a little bit of detail then. But we want to have that big picture just so that we can start really storing the information. Organization is only going to be beneficial. And once we get good at this, we can start doing this during the lecture, and then it comes a little bit easier. An example of this was Study Strategies seminar that we hosted. You guys did it through either 90 minutes, sometimes it's 3 hours. We go into a lot more detail. But I wanted to sketch this out just to see how much time I had for each section. And so I quickly sketched all 85 of these slides into these sections. There was an introductory section where I wanted to identify the main goals of the actual seminar, and there's the memory section, and it had 3 main parts. Then there's time management, which also had 3 main parts. Note-taking had 5 parts. Reading was actually one massive section, but then I broke that down into reading and into review. And under reading we had 3 main parts, and then under review we had 2 parts. So again, this here is a 1-page visual representation, outline if you will, of all of this. Now, not all of the details in there, but most of this will trigger off some sort of memory. If I go to note-taking, I'll say, oh, there are the styles. Oh, what styles did we have? Oh, we had the 4 styles. Okay, can I talk about each of these styles? What is the outline style? Or what is the U of A style? What is the combo? What is the Cornell style? Again, if I go to reading had, oh, we had to compare active versus passive readers, and then we said, okay, make sure we talked about having a goal and a purpose for reading. And we have a look at, oh, how can we go about reading? If I analyze the task of actually reading, it was broken into 3 parts: pre-reading, during reading, and after reading. Okay, what can I remember about each of those? Or could I add extra notes in there about that? So again, this is a very powerful way, especially when we're just trying to review, but also later on when I have to come and prepare for a midterm. This is an example of a student that did one for psychology. I think it's 104 or 105. They had the history of psychology. They broke it down into, they said history and then modern history, so I'm guessing this is early history. They looked at 2 different types, and then they looked at modern psychology as being these 3 types, and they compared and contrasted them by who was involved, what exactly is each school, and then just the important components. This is a great way to review. This one here is from Paleo 200. Very comprehensive. Here is another comprehensive matrix. This is a lot of information. You could imagine that. I believe the student told me that this was 2 lectures. This was 1 lecture, and then this was another lecture. So 2 lectures worth of information eventually summarized into 1 table. Again, identifying the repeatable categories, and this is how the professor described each one every single time. They talked about the theorist, they talked about society at large, and then they talked about how it talks about each theory talks about individuals and all the other categories. Summarizing is a great step, and when we're doing it on just one lecture, it's a little bit easier. When we're talking about summarizing a whole chapter, there's a little bit longer and a different task altogether, but we're just trying to summarize one lecture. And that summary is very straightforward. We just need the main ideas and the relationships. Main ideas and relationships. What's significant? The steps to doing that are pretty straightforward. First of all, we need to read something. So let's read the section of notes in your lecture or in the textbook, and then just move them to the side. Turn them over, move them out of your vision so you can't see anything. Then write down the first few words that you can remember. So if you read one paragraph or 2 or 3 paragraphs, what are the keywords that you can still remember? Don't look back, don't cheat, just what can you try and remember? Don't stress if you can't do it straight away. Give it a couple of goes to see what you can remember. If you can't remember anything, then of course go read it one more time and then come back. And then discard it and write down just a few keywords. What can you remember? And then once you've done that, now you've got some keywords. Now what you're trying to remember is, okay, now I've got these as prompts. What can I remember about these? How are they connected? So just write a few sentences, anything you can, trying to connect the words that you recalled. And that there is an excellent way to practice summarizing. Again, not easy, but the struggle that we go through of actively trying to recall is going to be much more beneficial the next time we come to review these for preparing for midterms. And the next time we only may need we'll just see those keywords and we'll be able to recall the connections a little bit easier, but we're going to struggle the first time. The last part is questions for testing. So we've got a test. So we've done, actually a good part of this would be, could you summarize what we've done so far? What were the first 2 steps, including this step? Looking at testing, again, if we've got, just take out a piece of paper, don't make flashcards, just look at your notes, and if this was going to be a question on an exam, what would it be? And just make a list of questions. This isn't too difficult at all, this part. Just look at the main idea, write it down as if it were a question on an exam. It could be who, what, when, where, why, it could be explain, it could be compare, contrast, it could be what is an example? Explain this, explain that. Pretty straightforward. You could easily come up with 10 quick questions to test you on today's lecture very quickly. An example from the linguistics class is, here's 6 quick questions that were just based on the headings, solely the headings of that presentation. What is language? What is communications? And then once I wrote these down, well, the student wrote them down, the question that I came up with was, what is the difference between these? So we got these 2 things. Okay, well, maybe I could even write a more complicated question by saying, hey, what is the difference between the 2 of these questions? The two of these topics. Again, what are 3 models of communication? Very factual. Can we just name the different types? Okay, then how does each one work? Testing. Another form of testing is to do practice problems. If your class involves that, then for sure you can do practice problems. But just focus on practice problems solely from today's class only. Organize for memory. Summarize to create meaning. You're using your own words. You're trying to recall the keywords that the professors use, and then you're trying to connect them by using your own words. We won't be able to remember everything the professor says, obviously, so we want to be able to start using our own words and our understanding of how those keywords are connected. Testing yourself. What did I learn today? Really monitor. Hey, can I actively recall all the stuff that I've done in here? If we organize and summarize, then the testing part's going to be a little bit easier. And then when we come back 2 days later, and we wrote down 10 questions, it'd be very easy just to quickly go through those 10 questions again. If you get them right, great. If you don't, okay, go look at your notes and find the answer. Again, really productive way of spending that 1 hour block that you have. You don't have to do all of these things every single time, but making these a part of what you do during a review is going to benefit you in the long term. That's all for this method, the COS method. See you in the next one.